Hey, welcome back, Better Call Saul fans. We're going to talk about Season 6, Episode 10 of Better Call Saul. Episode was titled Nippy. This is not a spoiler-free zone, so if you have not seen the episode, get out of here. And since everyone has left, if they haven't seen the episode, I've got to say welcome back to Gene Takovic. Welcome back to Jeff the cab driver. Excited to kind of talk about them and where the show's going to go. This will be a quasi recap. We won't go by scene, but we will talk about what we learned from the show, as well as what it might mean for us in the next 3 episodes. So let's jump into it. But before then, please like and subscribe to my channel so I can keep on growing. That is so appreciated. Okay, now let's jump into things. The very first thing that we learned is that the VHS is done. The video that Gene has been watching the last 6 seasons, it's completely over with. My question for you is Better Call Saul done? Are we done with that timeline? I absolutely loved this intro. Gene's beloved VHS has completely disintegrated. We see his world's best lawyer mug fall down in his office, and then the tape stops working and we go straight to that blue screen. So does that mean that we are 100% done with the Better Call Saul timeline? Unfortunately, I think so. We still have 3 episodes left, but I do imagine at this point that they're going to be split between the Breaking Bad era and whatever happens next with Gene, and we will not be in Better Call Saul's timeline any longer. The second thing that we learned is that Marion is Jeff the cab driver's mom. This was a great surprise. I did not predict this in my previous predictions video. In the beginning scenes of the episode, we see a pretty rude woman, if I'm being honest, getting her groceries, and she is soon introduced as Marion. It takes her a bit to warm up to people, and she's pretty short with most people that she meets. But that cold heart melts away when she sees Gene Takovic and his posters for his fake dog Nippy. As Gene's helping her get over some ice, which Gene in all likelihood planted there, he cuts the cord on her wheelchair, and as a result, he gets to push her on home. Which leads to my third thing that we learn in this episode, which is Jeff the cab driver was officially recast. In seasons 4 and 5, we had Don Harvey, and in this episode, we had Pat Healy. From what I read, after Bob's heart attack and the ensuing 6-week delay, Don Harvey was no longer available, so they had to transition to Pat Healy in this episode for Jeff. I have to be honest with you, friends. As much as I love this show, I've got to give it to you straight when I see things that I don't love. The old Jeff and the new Jeff that we had last night hit me really different. They were pretty different in my mind. The new Jeff is not as scary or mysterious or as cringy as the old Jeff. Do you remember how you felt when you saw the old Jeff say it back in season 5?
Come on, man. Say it.
That was really intense, that was weird, and I loved it. But the new Jeff? I didn't get any of those vibes from him. Honestly, he just felt like an incompetent loser. I will add, though, recasts are very, very tough, and my view of Jeff and how this whole thing worked might be different had Pat Healy been Jeff the entire series. But since we had such an intense impression of Jeff from those previous scenes, and it was so different from the Jeff that we saw last night, that this part in particular was a little disappointing to me. Now, number 4, the fourth thing that we learned is that Gene still has Saul Goodman inside of him. His confidence is back. He no longer looks like a shell of himself like he did in all of the previous flashbacks that we saw. The Gene in seasons 1 to 5 was a sad and lonely guy. In this episode, though, we finally see him get his confidence back under him again, and it was delightful to watch. We see him take control of the situation with Jeff once he meets up with him outside, and he tells him exactly what's going to happen. His plan is to get Jeff in the game of scams and cons, and his thinking is that if he was going to call the cops already, if Jeff was going to call the cops, he would have done so already. So he gives this guy, who's really barely getting by in life, and frankly doesn't have a very fun or exciting life, he gives him something to do that he's really desperately missing. Which is that fun, which is that excitement, the thrills that these cons have. And as we learned last week from Kim, the scams with Jimmy really are fun. That is, of course, until someone dies and you have massive regret. But before that, the scams are a lot of fun. And then the last thing that we see that shows that Gene still has Saul Goodman inside of him is he puts that Marco ring back on, which he does often before any big scam, either as Slipping Jimmy or as Saul Goodman. So it was really cool to see Saul Goodman still inside of Gene. He's not that sad, lonely guy that we've seen in the previous 5 seasons. He's still got a part of that inside of him. The fifth thing that we learned is what was Gene's overall scheme to eliminate Jeff as a threat. I talked about this in a previous video, but when Gene got off the phone with Ed, the disappearer guy, the vacuum guy, he said, in regards to Jeff, I'll handle it. And we had no idea what that meant. We finally learned what he meant when he said, I'll handle it. So the entire scheme kind of goes like this. He goes into the security office and he distracts the football fan Frank with some Cinnabon, and he becomes friends with those guys, and he times out how long it takes for this very meticulous eater to get done with this food. And the clock reads 3 minutes and 12 seconds, then 3 minutes and 18 seconds, and then 3 minutes and 16 seconds. So he uses approximately 3 minutes that it's going to take for this guy to eat that Cinnabon. By the way, didn't that look delicious? I'm going to be going to my Cinnabon later this week. Then he maps out the steps that it takes to go into the store, and he starts recreating the store in the snow with Jeff and his friend. And then once they get enough practice under their belt, they're ready to implement it, and they have the friend drop off a delivery box that has Jeff inside of it with Kathy, who is the store manager. Now, after Kathy allows the delivery box to stay overnight to be picked up at 10 a.m. the next day, Saul does his infamous, "It's showtime," in the mirror, and it was an absolutely classic scene, probably my favorite scene of the entire episode. So we see the plan get implemented. Jeff goes, I think, up to 20 different steps, so 20 different items that he was taking, and as he's in the final stretch, he falls down, and Saul has to think on his feet, and he starts crying to distract Frank, the security guard. And Saul starts saying he has no one in his life. His parents are dead. His brother is dead, and he has no wife. I do think it's interesting. He did not say my wife is dead or my wife passed away or whatever. So, we've still got hope that Kim's alive. No reason to think that she's not alive, but he has no wife. And then he cries to Frank even more to answer the question, what's the point of life if no one's going to remember me? What's the point of life if I'm going to be a complete ghost once my affairs are wrapped up, once my apartment's cleaned out, and my affairs are settled with my estate? What's the point? And Frank does his best to cheer him up and give him a, everyone has bad days kind of speech. But Saul, of course, gets in a much better mood once he sees Jeff the cab driver get up, regroup all the stuff, and then get out of sight before Frank the security guard is able to turn around and check the cameras again. Now, once the plan is complete and they regroup in Jeff's garage, we see that Saul's plan all along was for mutually assured destruction, to get them to commit so many crimes, Jeff and his friend, to commit so many crimes that if they ever rat him out, he's going to rat on them, and then they'll all 3 of them wind up in jail. Gene tells them that they are done and to never contact him again. Now, I'm going to talk more a little bit about what I thought about Jeff, the cab driver, and this scheme, and Marion later on. So we'll get back to this, but that was his overall scheme, and that's how we learned how he was going to handle Jeff, the cab driver, which they talked about in a previous, or they hinted at in a previous scene. So the sixth thing that we learned is that the writers did give us a few teasers and kind of filled in the meaning of some of the teasers that they gave us, as well as some little golden nuggets. So the first one is when they were practicing in the snow, Gene is encouraging Jeff to go through with this scam, and he says, I knew a chemistry teacher who couldn't pay his mortgage, and then 1 year later, he had a pile of cash as big as a Volkswagen. I really enjoyed that little Walt throwaway, and I've got to say, just on a side note, someone had mildly spoiled me, and they had said that it was confirmed that Walt and Jesse would show up in in this episode, season 6, episode 10. And honestly, I was kind of upset that someone spoiled that for me. So I was not looking forward to seeing that and just anticipating it. So I am so glad that they did not show up, and I will have to avoid, hearing that person predict when they're going to come on next. It's going to be one of the next 3 episodes. Who knows when, but I am so glad that didn't come to fruition. So that was one of the teasers they gave us, that little hint about Walt. I should note that in that scene, we did not hear Gene say that Walt was dead or allude to, the plan becoming a disaster. So just a little nugget. I'm going to talk about that in a second, but I thought that was really interesting. The second teaser they gave us was in this episode, Gene got to say to Jeff, the cab driver, the famous weird phrase, "Say it." If you remember, in the previous time that we saw Jeff, he was telling Gene to say it. Say that you're Saul Goodman. Say better call Saul. That's what Jeff, the cab driver, wanted Gene to say back in the mall. And now in this episode, we got Gene saying to Jeff, "Say it. We're done." So that was a really cool kind of wrapping that up in one bow. Nice to see. The other thing that we got to see in terms of teasers was there's the teaser that they gave recently where Gene says, "I am not your friend. If you get greedy and come back for more, don't." Some people thought that maybe this related to Kim stealing the Sandpiper funds or taking some of the Sandpiper funds. But most people that I saw, including myself, thought that this was going to somehow relate to Jeff, and it did relate to Jeff. So that was cool that they closed the loop there. And then the last little teaser that they gave us, or at least that I caught, I'm absolutely positive that there are more, but they put out a teaser in the mid-season break where Jimmy says in Kim's apartment that, "and after all that, a happy ending." Turns out that quote was related to Gene's fake dog, Nippy, and not related to any of the other characters. So glad we got all of those to come full circle, and we are going to have a few more teasers coming up that are still unexplained, but they did wrap up a few of these right here. My 7th thing that we learned is that Saul has his swagger back. As I've said this before, but I really got to drive this point home. Every scene that we saw of Gene in seasons 1 to 5, he was a depressed, sad, lonely guy. But in this episode, we saw Saul get his groove back. His confidence is back for a few reasons. One, he got rid of the Jeff threat. I think that's done completely. And again, I'll talk about that more in a second. But number 2, he really enjoys these scamps. Gene, Saul, he's not a Cinnabon manager. He can do it. And hey, I mean, if you get free Cinnabons, why not? I would do that. But that's not how he truly enjoys himself. In the words of Walter White, in the season, I think in the last series of the show, last episode of the show, he says, "I did it for me. I liked it. I was good at it. I was alive." And that's exactly how I think Saul feels when he's doing these scams. This is a core part of who he is, which I think is going to come into play in these next 3 episodes that we're going to get. So the 8th thing that we learned, or it's a question, but I'll answer what I think is going to happen. Will we see Marion and Jeff again? Or will they come back? Now, we know that the writers write things years before without knowing where it's going. And honestly, here's what I think happened in this situation. I think that they wrote these Jeff scenes years ago, and they got into this season, and they needed a way to make all of those scenes make sense with what we've seen previously. So they wrote this episode so they could simply wrap up Jeff's storyline and also make sense of everything that we've seen, but also, more importantly, push Gene into the next stage of his progression. So I don't think Jeff and Marion are coming back. I think they were trying to wrap everything up here, say goodbye to those characters, make sure that it all makes sense in terms of what we saw with Jeff and Gene in seasons 4 and 5, and kind of get them out of the story so that we can push Gene on to the next stage, which gets me to my next and last point. The 9th thing that we learned, well, actually, you know what? It's a question. I want to hear what you think in the comments below, and I'll give you my answer as to what's going to happen here. But the question is Gene done as Saul? Now, at the end of the episode, there's a few different ways we can interpret Gene putting that beautiful shirt back up on the mall rack at the end of the episode. First, you might say, That is Gene saying, I am finally done with Saul Goodman. I really don't think that's the case. You can also say him putting that shirt back on the rack is a calling card of sorts, essentially saying Saul Goodman was here, just like he did in the mall earlier when he wrote in SG was here when he got trapped inside the mall. Or there's another way you can look at it, is that putting that shirt up there kind of a placeholder until Saul Goodman returns in full. I actually think that last interpretation is going to be the case because I think Gene enjoyed himself way too much for him to put down Saul Goodman for good. Also, he already got outed by Jeff once, who, let's face it, was not the smartest guy. So he has to be thinking it's just a matter of time until someone else discovers him. And what if he can't con his way out of it the way he conned Jeff out of this? Being Gene, full-time, working in a mall in the Cinnabon, that's not a tenable long-term solution. He's going to get caught again. If the writers have put a lot of thought into the dates of when this all occurred, and I do think they did, then this Gene scene with Jeff is occurring around 6 months after he fled Albuquerque. Because remember, Gene and Walt left Albuquerque in March of 2010. Walt's in New Hampshire for 6 months. Then he comes back to die on his birthday, which is September 7th, 2010. So the football game between Texas and Nebraska that was referenced by Frank the security guard and Gene, that was on October 16th, 2010. So that means Gene's in Omaha for only 6 months before someone, Jeff, blows his cover and he has to do this scheme to save himself. So what are the odds that someone else is going to uncover who Gene really is if he stays put? I think those odds are pretty darn high. And what are the odds that he's going to do this scam and say, you know what, I'm completely done with this kind of life. I'm over it. I think the odds of that are really, really low. So I do think we will see Saul again. I think we'll see him scam again. And I think we will see Gene transform into Saul Goodman again, just like we saw in this episode. Now, that's all I have for this video. Let me know in the comments if you think Saul as Gene will be back. And please like and subscribe so I can keep on growing this channel. I will see you next time. Bye.